pauses, my apologies in advance. I've restarted this machine about 4 times today, and it's just not helping. What I have found though is if I come out of Teams, it usually lets me back in within 30 seconds or so. So if I do disappear, I will be back. If that's not copyright by anybody. Okay, so I want to continue on talking about compliance today. And you remember compliance is the idea that organisations have to comply with the legislative frameworks in which they operate. And there might, of course, be more than one of those. So they might have to operate under multiple legislative frameworks. As part of that, often what they tend to do is set up their own frameworks. Now, we've kind of talked about that in passing when I've been talking about control rather than compliance. But in terms of how organisations respond to specific compliance issues for their staff, quite often what they will do is set up a code of conduct. They will put in place a set of guidelines that if you want to be involved in that organisation, these are the guidelines that you have to follow. Which probably makes them not guidelines. For many organisations, if you don't follow the code of conduct, it is a disciplinary issue. So it might be something dead simple. So I might go to a conference and somebody might give me a keyring. Now, I have to be honest, you're not going to buy my loyalty with a keyring. And that's kind of what we're talking about. If I'd turned up and somebody had given me an iPad, then there might be an issue. But if I turn up and somebody gives me a keyring or a pen, not so much. So codes of conduct might have really simple things like, if you receive something from another organisation and it's over a certain amount, £20, £50, whatever the appropriate amount may be, you at the very least have to record it somewhere, but you might also not be allowed to keep it. That's just a physical thing. If you're getting something less tangible, if somebody buys you a meal or takes you to a sporting event, it could be a way of buying your favours so that you give that organisation the contract. You spend some money with them, you choose them over somebody else. So it might be something as simple as that. Or it might go into more legislative detail. It might talk about the sorts of things that you can and cannot do in terms of the legislative framework in which you operate. It might be about standards, about how you interact with colleagues, with customers, with third parties. It could be any of those things. So lots of organisations have these things. It's one place to go to understand what's expected of you. So it's really helpful in these specific cases where there are legislative burdens. Now, this isn't anything new, and those of you who have joined me in previous modules like Professional Computing Practice will remember that I've spoken about these things before. Codes of conduct are ancient, literally ancient. so ancient that one of the first codes of conduct that springs to mind was supposedly written on tablets of stone, which is both a nice symbol, but also quite often how things were written down. So the 10 Commandments, 5 Pillars of Islam, the 10 Precepts of Taoism, all of these things have existed for a long time, saying this is how you should live. But more as a person, of course, rather than for an organisation. But that idea that we can codify how we conduct ourselves has continued on. And certainly if you go into any of the professions, these codes of conduct will appear. The fact that that's on the slides as yellow means it's a link. So there's things like the Scottish Standards for Solicitors. If you're going to practice as a solicitor in Scotland, that's the code of conduct. If you're going to get into the banking sector, there's a banking code. If you're going to get elected, there are councillors' codes of conduct and MSP's codes of conduct and MP's codes of conduct. And these aren't small documents. He says, waiting till the app catches up. So there's a code of conduct for councillors in Scotland, and I want you to take note. 34 pages of things that you can and can't do if you're elected as a councillor. So the smallest elected area that you can possibly imagine. And those are the sorts of things that I've just been talking about that might be covered. Relationships with your colleagues, relationships with your employees, conduct, remuneration, gifts and hospitality, confidentiality. You don't want to go to a doctor and have them talk about your illnesses. Similarly, you don't want to go to a counsellor and have them blabbing about what you've asked them to help you with. So there is a whole bunch of things here, including a registration of interests. And that's to allow people to have some confidence that if you take a decision, you're doing it because you think it's the right decision, not because you've decided to build a new swimming pool 100 yards from your house because it is 100 yards from your house and you quite like a swimming pool. And it means that everyone can see these things. They can decide whether or not you have a conflict of interest and whether they believe that conflict of interest has affected your decision. So it's important in terms of ensuring that there's confidence in the work that takes place. There's the one on election expenses. That's been in the news recently because lots of MPs have taken money from Russian oligarchs to get elected. And we know that because all of their election expenses, all of the gifts, all of the donations are all on our register. And we can go through it and see who has accepted money. And all of a sudden, all these people who thought, fantastic, these Russian billionaires are giving me £100,000 because they think I've got a nice smile. Well, no, they were never doing that. They were doing it because they wanted influence. And given world events, that influence seems more than a touch malign. So we can go back and go, are we happy with the decisions that these MPs have taken when they've so clearly got an interest Are we happy to see things like, you know, Fred Flintstone MP took £100,000 from a Russian billionaire and then a week later put forward a motion in the House to recognise the excellent work done by the billionaire's company? Might there be a connection there? Well, the fact that it's all public, all online and all available means that those connections can be made. The difficulty, of course, that quite often nobody cares. If this had been a month ago and I'd said all the stuff that I've just said, most people would have went, so. But as of 2 weeks ago, it's quite high up everyone's priority list. But the idea that these things are public, the idea that we can see them, understand them, make sure that we're happy with them, means that everyone has the opportunity to say this is right or wrong. And you should absolutely avail yourselves of that. So these exist in all sorts of places, and they are almost universal, certainly in any large organisation. It would be very difficult to defend an organisation that didn't have a code of conduct in place, because the allegation would be, what have you got to hide? Why don't you say what you've signed up to? That said, simply having the code of conduct is no guarantee that people will follow it. And I hate to keep harping on about Westminster, but you see that in some of the issues that we've had recently. So again, we'll nip back here. And there's a line there about bullying and harassment. So go do a quick Google for Priti Patel bullying, and you'll find out that the Home Secretary was found guilty of bullying her staff. The staff member involved was given a payoff of about £350,000. Now, that didn't come from Priti Patel, that came from us. It came from our taxes. But there was no punishment of the person who carried out the bullying. Why? Because any punishment is at the behest of the person at the head of the organisation. There is nothing in there that says this has to happen. Everything is down to their judgment. So in this particular case, it was down to the judgment of the Prime Minister whether to punish someone for bullying their staff. You won't be surprised to know that her boss did not punish her. Which is why I'm saying there's no point having a code of conduct, and of course MPs do have a code of conduct, as do cabinet members. But if those codes of conduct can be ignored, if the example set from the top is not correct, then they don't actually mean anything. They're nothing more than public relations. And we talked a few weeks ago about the implosion of Arthur Andersen after the wrongly certified accounts by Enron. Those accounts should never have been certified. The people involved should never have done it. But the people at the top went, they're paying us how much? So the people just under them went, so you're kind of wanting this profit? So the people under them went, so to do that, we need to make sure that these accounts are okay. And the people under them went, tick. It comes from the top. A code of conduct doesn't work on its own. A code of conduct only works if people take note of it and care about it. It's less about a code of conduct than a code of ethics, a culture within an organisation. So they must be communicated, enforced and checked. So there must be governance, there must be risk, and there must be compliance. So I've already shown you the Councillor's Code of Conduct. And there's some of the things in there. You saw others in the table of contents. But interestingly, that one does say what the punishments might be. Sanctions for breaches of the code. You can be censored. You silly person, don't do that again. You can be suspended, where you're removed. You can actually be disqualified. In other words, you're not doing this again. No chance. So there are actual sanctions involved. So it's not just a document. And to ensure that these people don't mark their own homework, they're not enforced by councils or the councillors, they're enforced by an external body. They're enforced by the Standards Commission, a commission whose job it is to enforce standards in public life. It's interesting actually that councillors actually have a stronger code of conduct than Westminster MPs. Because MPs' code of conduct is self-policed. In other words, they can do what they want as long as they get enough people to agree with them. And again, if you've been watching the news, you'll remember something from about, 6 months ago, when the MP Owen Paterson was found guilty by the civil servants of breaking the code of conduct, but at the behest of his party, there was a vote that he shouldn't be punished for that. Again, all this stuff comes from the top. If people think that if you break the law, it doesn't apply to you, then you're setting yourself up to have a position where everybody will break the law because there are no consequences. Interestingly, there was, of course, again, I don't know if you followed the news, there was a backlash for this. So the original punishment for this MP was to be suspended from the House. And I think it was for, a fortnight or something. So he wouldn't be allowed to go to work and he wouldn't get paid for 2 weeks. But because they tried to pretend that what he'd done didn't matter, because they tried to give him no punishment at all, there was a huge backlash, which meant that rather than taking his punishment and serving 2 weeks, he was actually forced to resign as an MP. In part because there were enough signatures to have him removed if he hadn't resigned. So, as I said, these things can exist, but they're only helpful if they're actually observed. And they're only observed if people actually care about them. and set the standards, and those standards, as usual, come from the top. Governance, in other words. Now, I've shown you a couple there, a councillor's code of conduct and an MP's code of conduct, and those documents are available on the VLE if you want to look at them in detail. Just out of interest, the MP's code of conduct is 58 pages long, but quite a lot of it is because it's literally in a bigger typeface. It's like students saying, how many pages do you want? Oh yeah, 18-point bold, triple spaced. However, I've mentioned before that a lot of these documents come from the public sector because the public sector have to publish these documents because they are public bodies. Interestingly, I have managed to find codes of conduct for a company this time. So GlaxoSmithKline, who you can probably tell from that picture, do stuff with chemicals and drugs and pharmaceuticals. They have a code of conduct and it covers a whole bunch of things. The patients, the consumers, the industry is one section. The company itself, and there's our old friend gifts or hospitality. Financial procedures, all that kind of stuff. Our colleagues, what they expect in terms of interactions between the staff. What happens in the rest of the world, and it's not a surprise that human rights is a huge one in there. So I will give GSK the benefit of the doubt and say that they want to do this for the right reasons and not because there's a huge issue in terms of the actions of some pharmaceutical companies in terms of supplying opioids or supplying drugs at incredibly high prices or not supplying drugs to countries that can't afford them. We'll say that they're doing it for the right reasons. Either way, the code of conduct is remarkably similar. Not surprisingly, they're talking about the same things. What you do in the outside world, what you do in the organisation, what you do when you are in a position to interact with other people and get gifts and hospitality. So we're back to the a key ring's okay, an iPad isn't. And what they do with their patients, including, not surprisingly, the quality of products. And that's a big thing, not surprisingly, for organisations. And we spoke about this in terms of risk, reputational risk. And there was a pharmaceutical company who had an issue with one of their drugs. Now, it actually wasn't their fault. Some nutter had decided that they were going to blackmail the company. So what they did was they wandered into shops and poisoned some of these drugs. So they were over the counter, and it wasn't this, but like paracetamol or aspirin or whatever. And sent a thing saying $5 million or people will die. And the organisation were fantastic. The organisation said, no, we're not going to give in to this. They simply recalled every package of those drugs. It cost them an absolute bomb. But what it did get them was positive publicity. Everybody looked at them and went, yeah, good on you. Well done. Congratulations. We're with you. And actually their sales went up because people looked at the organisation and went, yeah, if they're going to do that, then there's no way they're going to do anything shady and we don't need to worry about buying their stuff. A few years later, there was another a pharmaceutical company who had an issue with one of their products. And it was their problem this time. They had made an error and some of their products were faulty. They did not, in this case, recall the product. They simply asked people that bought them to check for specific lot numbers and specific packages and all that kind of stuff. Not surprisingly, not everybody knew that this was a thing. Not everybody had seen the news. Not everybody knew to check for that lot number. So people got sick, and it was a huge PR problem for that organisation. The kicker, of course, about that story is it was the same organisation, just a few years apart. And when they did the right thing, they got lots of good PR and their profits went up. When they did the wrong thing, they got lots of bad PR and the profits went down. It's almost like doing the right thing is actually helpful in business. So GSK have a code of conduct, and they also have an ethics and compliance program. So in terms of governance, risk and compliance, this isn't something that happens in a boardroom or in a manager's meeting. This is something that goes out to all employees. We want transparency, respect, integrity, and patient focus. So we're back to this stuff that we did a few weeks ago. The compliance bit is actually bound up with the governance bit for a lot of organisations. Good governance is good compliance, particularly if your products can kill people. So this stuff goes out to all of the staff. They know who's involved. They have a specific compliance officer. And again, that's something you'll see quite often, particularly in larger organizations. It's somebody's job to do this. It's also true in the public sector. It's someone's job to do this. And again, going back to the news, you will have seen this stuff about compliance civil servants whose job it is to make sure that government comply. This organisation is so big that they don't just have a compliance officer, they've got lots of compliance officers depending on what it is they're talking about. US Pharma, Research and Development, Consumer Healthcare, Manufacturing, Asia, Europe, vaccines, different compliance officers for different areas or different geographical locations, all named. Everyone can find them. It's on them. There's also a compliance committee. There is an internal control framework. So we're going to talk about control next week. GSK have done that. So this is, we know that we have to comply. We want to go further. We are setting up a control framework to ensure that we're conforming with all the legislation, but going further. And to ensure that people take it seriously, they say things like this. At least 3 members of the corporate executive team appointed by the chief executive officer. In other words, they're saying the person at the top takes this seriously, so you need to take this seriously. They're sending out all the signals to say, yeah, we believe in this. Make sure you do something about it. And it starts talking about all the stuff that they write down. We've already seen the code of conduct. But there's other things, commercial practices, research and development, all that kind of stuff. Including, specifically, promotional practices. And again, it's not GSK, but there have been pharmaceutical companies who would go out, particularly in America, and spend money on doctors. So that the doctor wouldn't write a prescription for a painkiller. They would write a prescription for the Montgomery Burns Pharmaceutical Company pain relief medicine. They would deliberately target doctors who would get not curings, but, you know, a weekend in Hawaii or whatever it happened to be, a day out at the Super Bowl with accommodation, all that kind of stuff. On the basis that they would then prescribe all these pharmaceuticals. And again, go and look up the opioid crisis, go and look up how that developed and the amounts of money that were spent persuading doctors to prescribe all these things. And you'll see that why this is an important area for them. They talk about how they're going to teach people about how this works. They talk about what to do if it doesn't work. If you have a problem, this is how you go about it. So much so, there's a phone number. If you want to phone up and talk to them without worrying that your line manager will get upset or their manager will get upset, phone them. And this stuff is going to be looked at, it's going to be audited, it's going to be monitored. So again, you're seeing all these things coming together. As we keep talking about governance, we keep talking about risk, we keep talking about compliance. But as I've been saying all along, they are actually one whole. They all feed into each other. And if one of those pillars falls, the whole edifice falls. If you've got a three-legged stool and you take away one of the legs, it's not a stool anymore. And it's the same with governance, risk and compliance. Take away any one of those and it's not what you need to do anymore. Okay, anybody get any questions about that?
I think so. It's well explained. So again, it's the lecture, then I'll go away myself.
Sorry, excuse me a moment. Thank you. Ow! Very hot tea. Sorry, Gordon. Yeah, so one of the things I want you to do, because of that, is to go away and think about it. Think about the different codes of conduct, and I've pointed you to some of them already. Think about where they're the same, and again, I've pointed out some of that, but you also want to think about where they're different. And that might be because they have specific markets to be thinking about. They might have specific legislative issues for that company or for that product. You might want to think about why they exist and whether they would be appropriate for the sorts of organisation that you would be involved with. Or whether what you might want to do is simply remind those organisations that these things exist and the reason why they exist, and that they might want to look into some of these codes of conduct and come up with their own. It's up to you how you approach it. You might want to go the whole hog and come up with a skeleton code of conduct yourself. That's probably quite a lot to do, mind you. Okay, so that's that. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to stop the recording.